BLOCKTV. It's time now for Hodel with Hedel, a chance for us to zoom out for a moment and take a wider perspective on some of the heady issues that dominate the crypto markets as a whole. And as usual, to guide us on this journey of discovery, we're joined by Bitcoin influencer and thought leader, Director of Business Development at Kraken, Dan Held. Dan, pleasure to see you as always.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so Dan, kicking us off this week, the story of the moment, one that's caught most of crypto Twitter's attention, gold bug and notorious anti-crypto activist Peter Schiff has gone up and lost his Bitcoin. What's this all about?
Yeah, so Peter Schiff is kind of like the, it's like the comma, it's like a character, it's the, kind of evil character from like a comic book, right? He's always coming after Bitcoin. He's constantly throwing it under the bus, saying it's not useful, that gold is better. And so he continually attacks Bitcoin, and he's been attacking Bitcoin since 2011. So you can imagine how he feels. I mean, missing out on the biggest investment of not only his lifetime, but any human lifetime would drive anyone to madness, of course. So, in that kind of fit of madness, he's, constantly been berating Bitcoin throughout almost 9 years. And so the other day he claimed that he that the wallet, that the mobile wallet that he was using had forgotten his password. And so I believe that Eric Voorhees had gotten him set up with a wallet back when they had that debate, I think 1 or 2 years ago. And then since then, he's had, I think he moved it. I think this was a blockchain.info wallet, because eventually we saw the company blockchain.info reply in the thread. So it was a little confusing if this was user error or an error with the wallet. Needless to say, Peter very hilariously didn't understand the UX at all. And then commented that, of course I didn't forget my password. It's a very easy to remember numeric password, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, it was just really comical seeing Peter, who's constantly, deriding Bitcoin, making really, really primitive errors with his wallet. I am empathetic towards user experience, but when it's coming from someone like Peter, who constantly tries to attack Bitcoin, it doesn't come across as a genuine UX problem. It sounds more like Peter fumbling over his own shoelaces. So, again, I think this highlights, like, one is that the older baby boomers in general have difficulty dealing with new technology. That's why his brain can't get past like gold or physical gold and can't really evolve to the digital world. And two, he highlighted some pretty comical sort of user experience errors around like using a very simple password, which if you have a very simple password, that doesn't protect your funds very well. And so, I think Peter Peter got a little bit of what was coming to him in terms of criticism. He's been very, very critical of Bitcoin, and people, I think every single Bitcoiner out there took their turn to dunk on Peter, just kind of showing how little he had really spent learning and understanding the technology.
Do you think, though, just to sort of touch on the lesson maybe we can pull out of this, we all see, I think here in the sphere, Peter Schiff is a bit of a troll, as you said, if not a persistent one. But, looking at a real lesson to be learned from this, is it something to be said for that user experience? If we're going to head towards mass adoption, we are going to need to be able to make sure that people, even, the boomers as they are, will be able to understand how to use cryptocurrencies as a whole and how to use these wallets in the future. Is there a lesson to take out of this, if at all?
I'm not sure if there is one, because Peter's so critical in general and he doesn't typically provide good feedback. So, I do agree that UX is a systemic problem across all customer segments, whether that be millennial, boomer, or others. So, I think it is weird for someone to blame something like, oh, it's gold's fault because I forgot where I buried my gold. It really a nonsensical sort of complaint coming from Peter, because if he had a backup, which is what every single service recommends you do, if he had a backup, then he would have been fine. He wouldn't have had to worry about his password or not. And in every single wallet software, they typically force you to write down your backup. So, and sometimes they go double check that you did. For example, they'll go, okay, hey, after you wrote down these 12 to 24 words, we need you to input word number 3 and number 6. And so, it's kind of like Peter Schiff complaining that he forgot where he buried his gold after everyone told him, hey, you got to draw a map whenever you go bury your gold in the forest just to make sure you can go find it. So it's a little silly.
Certainly, but perhaps in true comic book villain style, this episode has given the sphere a chance to all bond over our general disdain for the actions of Peter Schiff out there in the world.
Certainly a rallying cry for everyone to go dunk on.
Exactly. All right, now turning to inside the crypto space and to a bit of development that's going on there, though one which I believe you might not be the biggest fan of necessarily. Gemini have come out saying that they're partnering with Flexer, a payments processor, in order to provide a mechanism to spend your crypto out there in the real world. This sounds on face value like a good thing for the space, but let's hear your thoughts, Dan.
Yeah, so first off, I want to say that I really like Cameron and Tyler. I think they were a phenomenal influence in the space, and they very much got the narrative that Bitcoin is gold 2.0 pretty much right away. And that's why I think this is so puzzling that that they would be showing off this software. I mean, it's I believe it's GUSD, Gemini dollar, and it's a representation of a dollar that I can spend as a dollar. I'm not really. I mean, we already have that with my Visa, MasterCard, Apple Pay, Starbucks Pay. So I don't really know what the innovation is there. And so I think that's why it's kind of puzzling. Is it's kind of like rebuilding the fiat world that already worked pretty well. And then on top of that, as we've continually seen with data and qualitative reasoning, no one wants to spend their crypto. It is slower, harder to use, and much more expensive. Not only do you pay a transaction fee, but you lose out on rewards points, you pay a volatility fee, and you pay an exchange fee to enter and exit that position. So, this feels like a demonstration from 2013, 2014, and then with the representation of a dollar, it just kind of makes it full circle. Not really doesn't really seem like something that people would really want to use.
I mean, certainly that does seem to be an issue, particularly that whether or not people actually want to spend, their crypto assets or, hold it for speculative purposes. And they're really pushing that, Tyler Winklevoss, in an article he wrote on Medium, really pushes that agenda, saying no longer just hodl, but also spendin', I believe was the term he used, trying to get that out there as a bit of a meme. But I suppose I got to wonder, does this not, again, build some sort of infrastructure that might make more people inclined to start using cryptos, that sort of fiat onboarding and offboarding? It's been a bit of a bottleneck in the space for some time. Does this maybe address some of those concerns, or you think it's an utterly useless development?
I think it has an inherent UX problem that cannot be solved with technology, which is volatility. Until the volatility is lower than my local fiat's volatility, then I will not perceive it as a medium of exchange or a unit of account. And furthermore, the unit of account sort of designation will take quite a bit of time. Most people don't think of their money in Bitcoins or Litecoins or Ethereum. People really don't feel that. People don't look at an apple on the shelf and they're like, oh, that's 0.00001 Bitcoin, or that's 50 sats. People don't look at their Litecoins in the same fashion. So volatility is a problem that cannot be solved and will only be solved through further adoption and increased number of hodlers. And as more and more people in the world, as millions and millions and potentially billions buy into Bitcoin, then it has enough people to then warrant a payments infrastructure that would make sense at that size. For example, too, not only do I not think in the unit of account of Bitcoin, I mean, I do as a Bitcoiner, but 99.9999% of the population doesn't. Not only that, but then, for example, like if I go and I walk up to 50 merchants and one of them accepts Bitcoin, no, certainly I'm not going to continue to ask merchants if they accept Bitcoin. it's definitely something that requires a network effect base number of hodlers to then be useful enough to be added to payment systems. So, maybe at 50% of the US population market penetration, then it might make sense to add Bitcoin as a payment option if the volatility after a decade or two has dropped below like the US dollar or other fiat currencies. Um, I think that is a problem that cannot be solved. I think that most people spending crypto, I've regretted every single time I have spent crypto. Um, every single time I've spent it, I've looked back and I'm like, why? Why did I buy some stupid stocks? Why did I buy this or that? None of us put this sort of expectation on gold. Like I live in San Francisco, the gold rush city. That's what it's known for. The biggest gold rush ever in human history happened around here. And there's not one merchant in the entire city that accepts gold for payment. But gold is still very, very useful. So I think that really highlights kind of the absurdity of it.
Right. Maybe certainly putting the cart before the horse and perhaps missing the narrative entirely, but we'll have to see. Maybe something is going on that they know that we don't. Maybe Flexa really is the future and these payment systems are out there, but you make a compelling case, Dan. I'll certainly say I wouldn't be eager to spend any of my Bitcoin out there on a cup of coffee anytime soon. Or a pair of socks.
I was the first product manager on the blockchain merchant wallet back in 2014, so I have a little bit of experience digging in on this.
Certainly you do. Glad you're bringing your sage wisdom to us. And on that matter of sage wisdom, I want to turn now to a recent tweet you made referring to earning a bit of yield on your Bitcoin. An interesting concept. A lot of people don't think about having the chance to earn interest on an asset they see as speculative to begin with, but a great function of Bitcoin itself, it has some monetary properties, even if it's not yet fully considered a fully fledged currency, again, depending on who you ask. But what were your thoughts and what led you to having this conversation, Dan?
Yeah, so I think any Bitcoiner out there is always looking about how they can add more Bitcoin or stack more sats. And earning a yield on the Bitcoin you currently have is a really great way to do that. And after digging into the lending and borrowing space a little bit, like BlockFi, Unchained Capital, after digging in there, I really got interested in trying to figure out other ways to earn yield, and went down the rabbit hole of kind of really digging in on this. So, lending is a classic model where you deposit your Bitcoins at like a BlockFi. BlockFi then takes those Bitcoins and lends them out to other counterparties who use them for operational funds, essentially like if, for example, like a crypto hedge fund needs to use it for, increased liquidity so they can fully capture arb between two exchanges. So that's an example. Lending is a classic one and actually really exploded as a market. CoinJoin market makers are a really cool one I just heard about. So CoinJoin is where it's an obfuscation technique where you can mix up your UTXOs with other people's UTXOs, and that sort of scrambles or obfuscates your transaction history and can help you have further privacy with your Bitcoin. Now, at any given moment, there are people who want to mix their coins, but they need people that also want to mix their coins, especially of a certain size. You can imagine there's a lot of people wanting to mix coins at 1 Bitcoin, right? But there's maybe not that many at 10 or 100 Bitcoin. So CoinJoin Market Maker, if you're CoinJoin Market Maker in a decentralized fashion, you can provide liquidity, which is really, really cool. So as a CoinJoin Market Maker, you don't have to really trust any, it's a protocol, and you supply liquidity for these coin joins. It is really difficult to look at like how much money you would earn in a year. And you also are facilitating the obfuscation of funds. But of course, if you've done privacy, good privacy and securely kind of separated these coins, then I think you can do this in a somewhat anonymous manner. So that's a really interesting way of earning yield, but I think that return might be like 1%. And then you can fund Lightning channels. You can provide liquidity to Lightning channels, which is also a very, very, very low yield. I think that is actually below cost right now. And then there's covered calls, and covered calls were really interesting. Let's say, a lot of Bitcoiners are holding out for when Bitcoin hits $100,000 at Bitcoin, right? So what you could do with a covered call is essentially with the Bitcoin you own. So you sell a call for Bitcoin hitting $100,000, and people have the option when Bitcoin hits $100,000. Whoever purchases that call option, they have the option of buying your Bitcoin at $100,000, and they'll pay you for the convenience of doing that. So that's called the premium, and they'll pay you. Let's say Bitcoin hitting $100,000. Let's say there's $1,000 premium, and that option expires in July. So you would sell that covered call option. If Bitcoin doesn't hit $100,000, you keep the premium and you receive that premium day one. If it does hit $100,000, the option purchaser doesn't have the obligation, but they have the ability to purchase your Bitcoin from you at $100,000 of Bitcoin. And so that's really cool because let's say you have that target price of selling at $100,000 of Bitcoin. In the meantime, you can earn yield on your Bitcoin and earn a return on that and continually sell those covered call options at $100,000 and just continually earn yield on your coin. And, depends essentially how much you would earn in yield really depends on how far away how far away that option has been written for. So like, for example, like right now, Bitcoin's at nowhere close to $100,000 of Bitcoin. So the amount or the premium or the yield that you would earn is very, very small versus if you were to sell $15,000 covered calls. Those would earn you a much higher yield. But simply put, if you're closer to the current price, then there's a higher probability that that event might happen. And so, a covered call is really exciting for someone who is ready to exit and they have that exit price. However, if Bitcoin moves above $100,000, the covered call purchaser now captures that value from $100,000 on if they choose to exercise that option. So that's what you're kind of giving up, is you're giving up that future upside, and people are purchasing your covered call and paying you a premium for that, for that sort of luxury.
So then if we were to sort of conflate all of these different ideas, take a look at all the different potentials for earning yield, is there one that stands out to you as the sort of best in this market environment as an option for those wanting to earn a bit of yield on their crypto?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's definitely a sliding scale of ease of use. You can really quickly put yourself in a bad situation with covered calls, or being a market maker for coin joins is super, super technical. But when it comes to lending, those are pretty drag and drop sort of style products where it's really easy to use. Same with I would say coin join, Lightning, and covered calls are all very technical. So I would probably recommend lending. And this would be only using a very small percentage of your funds to go lend. Again, lending does take on risk, and that's what you're compensated with in terms of a yield.
All right, certainly things to consider. Simply hodling is not the only way out there, although as with all these things, if you're not holding your coins in your own cold wallet, there's always risk involved. Not your keys, not your crypto, as some may say out there, but these options are potentially available. All right, so now turning to some sort of bigger macro issues that are being put out there. We've seen an interesting development coming out of Christopher Giancarlo, the former head of the CFTC, who came out wanting to set up a digital dollar think tank as a sort of idea out there in the market. Dan, what do you make of this latest move? Do you think it has any legs, and do you think we'll see a digital dollar anytime soon?
So, Giancarlo has been a really great advocate for the crypto space. So I'm personally a fan of what he's done. He's been really big into Bitcoin, really big into other things. And so, leaving the CFTC, what do you go do next? I think it's interesting that he wants to focus on a digital dollar. I'm not really super bullish on central bank digital currencies because that really doesn't improve the current infrastructure that much, and it doesn't provide any real utility for retail or the everyday consumer, because the central bank can't open up the ability for retail consumers to deposit at the Fed. is if you do that, then you immediately undercut the entire their entire banking, the entire commercial banking system, because why wouldn't I want to deposit my dollars at the Fed, which the counterparty risk there is almost none compared to Bank of America, Wells Fargo, or someone else. So I don't really see central banks going and undermining their commercial banking sort of infrastructure. So really this would just be a central bank coin that's shuffled between different larger counterparties, like anyone who has a seat at the Fed window. So I don't really think that it's a super big innovation. It's more of like a database technology, which has existed for many decades. So I'm not sure exactly what the digitization of the dollar means. I mean, the dollar's already been digitized for over a decade. And I think, with Wall Street and the Fed, I think it might have been digitized even much longer, much longer time ago. So I'm not exactly sure what the innovation will be there.
I mean, it's an interesting point given the moves coming out of China, in particular, their sort of moves to create a CBDC based on a digital renminbi. That's something that they're seeing as an innovation, as a possibility, and many argue that the US is being left behind. Moves like this seem set to push forward maybe an agenda where the US could still be at least involved in a digital asset framework and, at its best, a sort of a blockchain integrative element into their systems, as you say, whether it truly makes a difference or not. But despite Giancarlo's interests, we've heard from the current Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin in the past saying that the US is not likely to move ahead. In fact, we even have a soundbite of him making such statements.
As it relates to the Fed, and Chair Powell and I have discussed this at length, I think we both agree for the near future, in the next 5 years, we see no need for the Fed to issue digital currency. And that's because, again, we have a very sophisticated system. The Fed is working on electronic payment system. We need to make sure they're real-time electronic payment system in the U.S.
So then Mnuchin saying they're not going to be working on it anytime soon, and almost to your point, it doesn't really matter. It's not really a key driver because they have the electronic payment systems. Do you tend to agree?
Totally. Yeah, and the idea that it would be on a blockchain is comical. It's not going to be on a blockchain. It's going to be totally controlled. There's no way a central bank's going to put their money on a chain they can't control. So it's a completely, it's just going to be another set of tools that they can use to move money around with complete control, which a blockchain was special purpose built to build Bitcoin, which is the exact opposite of that. There is no central party that can control transactions or can control anything else. And so I think that's antithetical to the entire point of blockchain.
All right, well, there we go. Dan Held calling for the Bitcoin revolution, not the fiat evolution. Dan, I want to thank you so much for speaking with us today on these important topics. So much more to come. So for those at home, make sure you stay with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in news and information. I'm Westropp-Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.